Here we are with Glenn Ceresoli, senior Iyengar teacher, 30 years plus teaching.
Yes.
And we're going to ask him, as much as we've got time for, about what is Iyengar, what makes it effective, and the sort of things of what we should be thinking about while we're in the postures, that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. So let's first of all start with Iyengar. What makes it what it is? What characterizes Iyengar?
Okay, so technically I can give you four very distinct sort of answers to that. First of all, there's alignment, there's sequencing, there's usage of props or equipment, and there's the integration with the Patanjali Sutras. If I maybe start with that one and work back the other way,
Sure.
So from the more subtle or philosophical aspect of it, from my interpretation and understanding in working all these years with Guruji, and he basically was inspired by the sutras of Patanjali, which doesn't speak so much emphatically about asana. It speaks about the practice of yoga, and it speaks about the way to live according to the yoga precepts, really. And in that instance, I believe Guruji took that and created a language interpreting the way of doing something and applied that to asana, pranayama, and the practices of yoga. So that in that way, he has integrated the Patanjali Sutras into the practical aspect of practicing asana and pranayama. So it's not only that he is doing that, or it's a way of yoga, and that's just the way he interpreted and developed and progressed and so forth. From that came alignment, came the sequencing of asanas, and came probably, I would hesitate to say the biggest contribution, but certainly a very significant contribution is the use of props, which basically enables people of all denominations, Sikh or otherwise, to still have a yoga experience. Not only to gain the physical benefits of that, but to possibly have a yoga experience, which maybe we'll touch on a bit later on. Sure. In distinguishing what that exactly means. But they're basically the four tiers that distinguish Iyengar practicing yoga compared to some of the other styles or lineages that exist.
Yeah. And when we think about alignment, what are we talking about? What do we mean?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think that here we're touching upon something that pertains to the practice of yoga in general. That there is always a gross element, and then a more subtle element, and a more subtle to the subtlest of subtle elements, and that these dimensions or layers, as we see them, are according to the capacity of the practitioner. Yeah. Naturally, when we start off, like little children, when they start off, they have little capacity to understand, and so therefore you tell them what to do, what not to do, and that's it. Yeah. As children get older, their ability to understand more grows, and therefore so does what they can take in. Yeah. Same with the practice. In practicing asana, not much point going to all the subtle layers first if you haven't grasped the gross aspect, that which is most obvious. So therefore, we're first of all talking about the alignment of the skeletal structure. But what we have to instantly recognize is that as soon as you go to the work, applying techniques in order to engineering, the engineering of the structural skeletal system, you're automatically aligning the mind. So you're aligning the bones and the joints as such in the way they're being positioned, but the mind is also being aligned with the body at that point in time.
Because of the focus you need to do that?
Yeah, exactly. In other words, there's immediately an integration that takes place from the mental realm to the physical realm, to the grossest aspect, the anatomical, structural. On that, we're looking to position the bones and the joints of the body so that the soft tissues accommodate those positions, so that the soft tissues don't dictate, whether it be to their restrictions, imbalances and so forth, what the joints or the bones can do. When they do, they also hinder or dictate how the energetic pathways can activate or not activate, how they can flow or not flow. So all of these things are part of what we are aligning. You're aligning the skeletal structure, but you're also aligning the soft tissues. you're also aligning the energetic pathways, you're also aligning, the nadis and energy centers, and so everything essentially is being aligned. It's just that at first we're only obviously aware of the gross aspect of it.
Yeah.
And it's not after years of practice with the gross aspect that your conscious awareness starts to be informed by the more subtler realms. That initial focus and everything that you put into that structural alignment sensitizes the mind. And that with familiarity and continuity of that practice, you start to become aware of the more subtle realms, one by one. And hence, everything is being aligned. So we start off with what's easy to understand, structural alignment.
Yeah.
But, everything is existing at the same time. It's just that we're not aware of it.
And on the energetic alignment side of things, does it have any relationship? There's a lot of talk nowadays about sort of myofascial lines, the work of Tom Myers talking about sort of these anatomy trains.
Mm-hmm.
You can see it sometimes when you're talking about going from the base of one foot to the tip of one hand, and you can imagine it linking through.
Yeah.
Energetically, or how does it differ from that?
Okay, that's still talking about a physical structure.
Yeah.
Whereas when I'm talking energetic, I'm talking about a current.
Yeah.
Okay, you don't see it. You can see if there's a current from where you switch something on.
Yeah.
You see it at the other end. You can't see the current. Another way it's a frequency. We've got the mobile phone, and we might be talking to somebody, but there's no wire.
Yeah.
There's no wire, there's a frequency, but can you see the frequency? No. So again, there's all different layers of currents as well. There's even, the current of our neural system. There's the energetic flow of the fluids in the body. So we can get down and sort of, dissect, all the different things of what we could define energy as being. But in the end, it's an experience. There's an experience. If I sit here like this, there's a downward energy experience. And sooner or later, what is translating as a physical, or I should say what is expressing itself as a downward energy, is going to start pulling down my mind and my emotions. Whereas as soon as I'm aware of that, and I just lift the energy up without any exaggeration, because then that's more than just lifting it up.
Yeah.
It's an imposition.
Yeah.
But as soon as I lift that energy up, that means that energy is moving upwards and it's contributing towards the potential state of my mind and emotions, my internal environment. And therefore, that dictates or contributes to how I'm experiencing this moment in existence.
Yeah.
And in the end, in the asana, that's what we're coming to. We go through all of this work to create alignment and so forth. But in the end, what we're creating is an environment, an ambience for us to then experience. In the process, that asana will reveal something to us about us. It will reveal something to us about the asana, because it is a relationship.
And it's that's important rather than where we are, or...
It's a working towards that. So let's say, we know each other briefly, we've encountered each other here and there.
Yeah.
Our relationship can only be as deep as the amount of time we spend together.
Yeah.
As well-meaning and as open and all the rest of it may be.
Yeah.
So we experience ourselves and that relationship at that level. If we were to become best buddies and spend a long time together, then that relationship would grow and become more intimate. Yeah. So it's the same with the asana. The experience in the asana, the yoga experience in the asana, is only limited by your relationship to it, the amount of time that you've spent there and how you spent that time. We could become best buddies and, drink down at the pub all day long. And, there would be a certain rapport there. Yeah. But if we did this every day and started speaking about, deeper things and got on, because maybe we don't get on. Let's say you ask me a question, I give an answer, you don't like that, and all of a sudden I walk off.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So then that'd be the end of the relationship.
Yeah.
In the end, the asana or the practice of the asana is there to practice being consciously aware. And then what that brings is up to the individual. I don't think the practice of yoga is dictating what you should experience.
No.
You know, I think it simply opens the doors or the portals to possibility. And then according to the way that you practice that, there is more chances or less chances of experiencing it this way or that way. When I'm teaching, I attempt not to impose upon my students my experience of yoga.
Yeah.
What I try to share with them or suggest is the benefit of the experience that I've had.
Yeah.
Saying that if you were to approach it this way and that way, do these things here, and then have a look at your experience.
Yeah.
Rather than saying, this is what you have to see or feel or so forth.
Yeah.
You know, it's more about the process rather than, you know, what the outcome of that process is. Because every individual has to have that for themselves. A teacher doesn't want to take that away from the individual.
Yeah.
A teacher is trying to make that available to that individual, saying, do these things in this manner and have your experience.
And we're all coming quite often from different starting points for different reasons, for different physical bodies, different mental bodies.
Yeah, different you know, karmic outcomes, you know, different karmic situations. You know, I initially came to integral yoga. There was obviously something, as far as I'm concerned, God's got a plan, you know, and it's like he's looking and saying, okay, well, I'm going to send him there first. That way his ego's not going to get so carried away with all that other stuff, or at least he'll maybe be able to keep it in check.
Yeah.
And then when he gets to that stuff, then he'll be okay. He'll work it out sooner or later.
Yeah.
Because when I think back at my life, you know, 30 plus years ago, yoga was still a relatively taboo thing then. You didn't tell people to do yoga because they thought you were a freak. Some cult thing.
Surfing was okay. Yoga
surfing,
was
surfing was fine. All those things were fine. But no, not yoga. So, you know, I used to keep it to myself. And when I first got into yoga, I lost a lot of friends very quickly.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, it was too frightening, too threatening, you know, to their lifestyle and their reality at that point in time. And so, but for some reason, I immediately embraced it and was quite okay about leaving all the rest of it behind. In fact, I didn't even think about it. This idea just grasped me, and I thought, hey, I want to know what this is. I want to find out.
How did you end up in your first class to start with?
It was my very first class. I went because my girlfriend dragged me along, literally dragged me along. She, "Come, you never want to do that."
That or a chick flick?
I was trying to avoid it at all costs. And in the end, I thought, okay, don't be so, you know, rigid, closed-minded. And I went along, you know. And but you know, there was a period during Shavasana, that first class. Still today, I can't describe it in words. You know, it doesn't want to come out because words just won't do it. But I had an experience, and I thought, I really have to find out what this is. And that was it. That was the start of my experience. Basically, I was 19 years old. And that's been it ever since then.
Still giving you the fire.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So, you know, 35 years later, nothing's changed. But the thing is that back then, when that first happened, never in my wildest dreams, even induced under severe drugs, could I ever imagine that, you know, one day I'd be travelling all over the globe teaching yoga.
Yeah.
You know, I could never have imagined that, you know, just at that time. But anyway, yeah.
So how does our intention, what intention should we have when we come to the mat? That's important, isn't it, as to how we approach what we're doing.
It depends on what it is that we want from it. So again, if we come back to that, you know, when I first came to yoga, I you know, was quickly exposed to the philosophical aspect of it.
Yeah.
And so even then, when I, you know, did finally a couple of years later come to Iyengar yoga, that was already there. It was already present. A lot of people, though, they come to yoga, they come straight to asana.
Yeah.
So they don't know anything else about yoga, especially in today's age.
Yeah.
So they come straight to the asana, and that's their first exposure. There's no philosophy or there's no anything of that nature. They just come straight to the asana. When they come to the asana in that way, then you don't want to go on about all the subtle this, that, and so forth. It's just engage them with that at their level.
Yeah.
At least that's the way I approach it as a teacher.
Yeah.
You know, don't try to give them more than they can. Don't underestimate them either.
Yeah.
You know, treat them, you know, intelligently. But give them something and occupy them and immediately teach them something.
Yeah.
Show them something about themselves and about the yoga that intrigues or that interests, you know. And then as soon as the interest is burning, okay, then you've got something. Because unless a student wants to know something, that student is a very difficult material to work with,
Yeah.
you know. So rather than saying you should or this, that, whatever, it's always, in my opinion, a suggestion, you know. If that student, however, starts to thwart, you know, what you're suggesting and everything and becomes an unworkable situation,
Yeah.
you know, then you need to either you put the foot down or you show them the door,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So that way you're developing a relationship which says, okay, either you trust my guidance here or I can't work with you.
Yeah.
Because a willing mind is a willing body.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to break through all these forces of resistance in your body to get it into this position or shape, that's not going to be so likely if the mind is resisting, if it's not willing yet, if it doesn't want it.
Yeah.
You know? And this was one of the big lessons in my own practice, that, you know, there were certain things that I just didn't like. And it didn't matter how hard I pushed or this, like forward bends. I hated forward bends when I first started, you know, yoga.
Yeah.
Didn't want to know about forward bends, you know. And I just avoided, or I did them because I had to. And it wasn't until one day I saw the need. I have to take care of this because I can see I'm getting grossly imbalanced here.
Yeah.
You know, I can do the back bends or the twists or this, that, but forward bends, I just haven't put the time in, you know.
Yeah.
And so when I finally decided that I ought to, out of balance sake, then I did. And then I took to it, and then I started learning all these other reasons why I didn't want. But what changed was the fact that I wanted to, not that I didn't want to. And I saw that the mind, when it didn't want to, it would find every reason why not.
Yeah.
And as soon as the mind wanted to, it found every possible way why yes, how to.
Yeah.
And then forward bends just came. So it wasn't until something shifted up here, actually, that then something shifted on the physical level.
And you didn't force the shift came about naturally?
The force came about naturally just due to one day seeing the vast discrepancy that there was between what I could do back bending and what I could do forward bending.
Yeah, and being open enough to realize that.
And also to realize that I enjoyed doing that and wanted to do that, and I sadly didn't enjoy or didn't want to do the other.
Yeah.
And then, you know, of course, yoga is always theoretically written in books that it's about balance.
Yeah.
And just one day it just struck me and said, okay, enough's enough. I've got to take care of this, you know. And that was it. That was the flip. That was the change. And as soon as I did that and said, okay, let me see what this stuff is about and take care of this. And naturally it was, you know, arduous, agonizing, was all those things there. But got taken care of until I found the balance.
And a lot of people have a certain area in their body that seems to be resistant to change. It might be the hips, it might be the shoulders. Okay, a lot of it might be coming from posture. We sit at desks a lot and that nowadays. But how much of it is a emotional factor as well? Because I know people that have been practicing for 20 years and they still have a stubborn bit of the body that doesn't want to... Everything else is opening and that's just staying put.
Yeah, look, there's no doubt that aside from our physical activities or lack of physical activities, there are parts of the body that suffer lack of circulation. Right? They suffer lack of circulation, and due to that, you know, that part of the body basically becomes dull or dies slowly. The emotional content of that, of course, is present. There are all sorts of connections in our system, the different parts of the body, even different muscles that relate to different emotions. You know, again, without specifics as such, but yeah, basically it is true. You know, this area here, for instance, is, you know, where we store our anxiety, our emotions, our fears. And so this area here, in back bends, you know, you encounter a lot of people literally want to, you know, become nauseous and want to throw up sometimes, you know, when you bend them backwards over a chair. And all of a sudden this area becomes open and exposed and they go, oh God, where am I? You understand? So it feels like all of a sudden, you know, you're lifting the lid on Pandora's box and it's all going to be exposed, you know. And so, you know, just even the notion of that makes you grip and go, oh, got to hold on, close that lid. And so that's why, with some people that you can't do it all at once. You have to slowly prime that open and show them, just open this much, gain confidence with that much. That you're not being exposed to something that you're not going to be able to handle, that's going to be disastrous or something of that nature. And then you continue on, until one day they feel confident enough to fully open and let go. And that's the case whether it's this area here, your solar plexus and so forth, or whether it's your groins. It's a similar thing. A lot of people are tied in the groins because essentially it's a very sensitive, private part of our body, and we protect it, and that symbolically relates to other things that maybe we feel the need to protect or hide from, or so it even sort of exposes itself in some sense in our posture, those type of mental, emotional things.
As you mentioned posture, how do we take what we experience on the mat out into the real world? Because quite often we're working out, and then the moment you leave the door, everybody, not everybody of course, but it's easy to get back into your patterns of behaviour outside. So is there a key to sort of
there is a key to it, and the key is the process of practicing, which again, Mr. Iyengar has developed, is like a template. That means the way that you approach the asana has a certain formula, if you like, an order, a formula, and that same formula and order of process is what you apply out there. If we come back to what I spoke about earlier, that everything is a relationship. It's our relationship to our body or to our mind, our relationship to the asana, our relationship to the outer world, real or unreal, is such. And that process that we discover on the mat while we're practicing yoga is the same process that we apply out there. In other words, let's say you're finding a stubborn point, right? You can't stretch that hamstring. You might decide, okay, I'm really going to stretch this hamstring, and you might just get aggressive. Right? And it's showing you that's what you are. You want to take that thing by force, come whatever, you're going to take it. Right? And so it's showing you that. It's the same thing that you do out there. Whatever you're doing on the mat is the same way that you approach life as well. It may not be, immediately that clear to you or that obvious, but basically it is. It's showing us the depth and the nature of our character and how we respond to things. Another person might fall apart and say, I'm never going to be able to stretch his hamstring. You know what I mean? So the two extremes of something. And somewhere between those, you have to find an effective way to get access to that hamstring, so to speak. So then you have to modify your approach. Let's say the aggressive person tears the hamstring off the bone, pack it away for a couple of months or something, and start all over again. You know, the person who feels futility and overwhelmed emotionally never gets anything done because they can't bring themselves together to do it. So either one of those is inefficient. And so to become effective or efficient, to gain access not just to that hamstring, because I think that's the danger. So many people in the West think, let me open up my hips, let me open up my shoulders. But for what purpose? Right? There's a reason and there's a purpose. A reason so that I can get into an asana. But what's the purpose of that? What's the the bigger purpose of the whole thing? So I usually don't talk so much about, we're going to do hip openers today. I will do a series of asanas that require that of the body. And that in that process we're going to address all sorts of things. And so it becomes a more holistic, idea. And I think that some teachers who say hip openers may well have that same intention. But as soon as you say we're going to do hip openers, that's what the students hear. And they don't know the intention or the wider, bigger spanning intention of the teacher. And so they think, that's the example they get, hip open, it's about opening the hips. Whereas it's not about opening hips. Opening the hips is a preparation for the asana. And the asana is an experience. Whereas if you're opening the hips, that's achievement-based. It becomes an ambition or obsession to achieve something rather than experience something. And I think this is also one of the distinctions that Iyengar yoga proposes, in the way that you practice. The way that you practice, not just what, but the way that you practice.
And you spend a lot more time than many other strains of yoga in the asanas. And what does that do? What does the extra time do?
The idea is, okay, first of all, again, we always have the layers.
Yeah.
As far as the physical body goes, it has more time to adapt.
Yeah.
You know? If you're in a dark room and you put the light on and you've got 10 seconds, you can only see so much of that room in 10 seconds. Put the light on for an hour and you have more time to observe what's in that room. It's the same thing with the asana. When you go into an asana, the light of awareness goes on. You're aware that you're in this asana and you're looking around, you're seeing what is not, and so forth. If you're not spending enough time in that asana, you don't have enough time to see what it is.
Yeah.
You don't have enough time to adapt. You don't have enough time to react, to respond. At least you do, but only superficially, according to the time you spend there. And in the end, the depth of what your experience is less by the amount of time that you're spending in it. Now, again, we've got to cover all grounds here, because somebody who's got 30 years experience, in 10 seconds can experience a lot.
Yeah.
But when you're starting out, in 10 seconds, you don't experience anything except pain.
Oh, it hurts. Yeah.
Right, exactly. That's the main thing that you experience. And so, we have to start getting past that first step, that thing that, pain, and you start to have a relationship with pain. First you become aware of the fear of it, the avoidance of it, and then you quickly learn that, hey, this pain actually, I associate that with my hamstring starting to feel a lot better now and freer, and now I can actually do the pose, and now I'm not so concerned and distracted about the pain, I'm actually feeling something else.
Yeah.
And therefore the experience starts to grow. It grows from that initial stage.
And something I've seen on your website, I'm just going to get the words right, you talk about replacement method.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Basically, we're replacing a conscious habit.
Yeah.
We're trying to create a conscious habit in something and replacing the unconscious habit. So the unconscious habit in the hamstring is to be short.
Right.
Okay? And then what we're doing is we're reprogramming information into that hamstring. And we're reprogramming it, replacing the old information. If we think that, every, what is it now? I think it's every 12 seconds, a cell dies and the new generation of cell is born. So every time there is a new generation of cell, it's absorbing new information, new impulses, whether they're neurally transmitted or otherwise. And therefore, if you stay in the pose for an hour, umpteen cellular generations have taken place, taken in the new information. With the old cells, the old information starts to die out and fades out of the equation. So it's like this. In the same way we biochemically or cellularly exchange generations of the cell and the information in that cell,